Oh,
Hello, can you hear me?
yeah, yes, I can. Oh, your video dropped. I can hear you. Okay. Hi.
Oh, do you see me?
Yes, I see you now. There we go.
Fantastic.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, hello. Nice to meet you. This
It's
is
nice
cool.
to meet you too,
Yeah.
finally.
Yeah. So, okay, so your name is Hester. How do you pronounce it? Like Rame?
Hester Rame,
Rame.
yes.
Okay. Because I looked it up
Mhm.
and it was like non-English word and I just got confused.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
actually taken, it's a stage name. I had recently changed it. Rame is taken from an old English word that it's not really used anymore. And it kind of means like mourning or great anguish. And
Right. Yeah. Nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
So
so
for those who don't know, this is Hester Rame, um, from I think based in Nashville is what I
correct. I'm
gathered.
currently have been since 2009, I think. Gosh,
Okay.
it's been a
Right.
the
Just I think your audio is cutting out a little bit here and there, like at the end of your
end of my phrases.
yeah, it's kind of in and out a little bit. You can hear me fine?
I can, yeah. Let me
Yeah.
check and make
Yeah,
sure. Seems
your
like it's
your audio is clipping here and there.
on speaker. Is that help?
I'm not I'm new to this, so I have no idea. Um,
If I can. Oh wow, there's so many cool little settings in here.
yeah, it could if
I
it's
want to
like
press
a
that. I'm gonna end the call. I think maybe if I use these,
yeah, we'll
my
try
earbuds
that.
might help sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes they have a little maybe. Is that better?
Yeah, I can hear it so far. So far, so good.
Is that better now? Okay. Great. Yeah, I can hear you a lot better too,
Okay,
actually.
this is
So
good. Yeah, this is
awesome.
nice. Cool.
Right. Awesome.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so okay, so I was looking at your bio has changed a little bit. Um,
Yep.
so how would you want to? Because to me, when I heard your music, I would see it as hauntingly beautiful, is how I would
Oh,
describe it.
thank you.
Um, but
That's amazing.
that's just how my experience listened to it. So how would you describe your own music?
Um, Man, it's changed so much over the years because I think I've come more into myself and
Hmm.
really, um, kind of stepped out of a place of, um, neurodivergent masking and all of that, and just really kind of come to a place where I feel like I can really be myself. And it's taken a long time and a lot of therapy and everything, of course. But it's kind of genre fluid at the moment. I think that just depending a lot too on like production and things like that. I mean, almost anyone's music can sound drastically different just based on, how it's created. But yeah, I mean, I would say like, if you're talking just piano vocal, like, acoustic live performance and stuff, it's kind of like doom folk, I guess. Kind of just like melancholy. We're talking about our trauma. We don't have time to write love songs. We're working through some stuff, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, it's just I've just definitely gotten away from that whole thing of when I was younger of constantly being told, you should write happy pop music. And I was like, "Ah, it just doesn't, I don't listen to that. So it
Right.
doesn't really resonate with me a whole lot. There are very few pop artists that I really listen to that are super mainstream. Um, and so, I was just like, that's never been my thing. So I think I stepped away from music for such a long time because I felt pressure to create music that wasn't really aligned with what I wanted to convey and express, and that sort of thing, because music has always been such a huge outlet for me and truly a special interest of mine. Pretty much for my whole life, I can't do anything without it. You're not even going to catch me washing dishes without my earbuds in. So,
Fair.
but yeah, I definitely have gravitated towards creating the things that I want to create and the things that I have a tendency to listen to. I've always really been into like Tori Amos and Fiona Apple and Ani DeFranco and Chelsea Wolfe and people like that. So um, it was just kind of more in line with the things that resonated with me as well. And even though I listen to a lot of those artists, I feel like my music is definitely unique to me and my experiences and certainly my capabilities, which I'm always trying to improve as well. So
That's nice. Yeah. So many interesting points already that I'm trying to make sure I remember them so that later I can
I
talk about
totally
it.
get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And I just ramble. So feel free to stop me at any time.
I am the same. I'm trying to I was watching my own interview last time. I was okay, I gotta talk a bit less myself. But yeah. So one thing that jumped out to me that you said is you feel pressure to make kind of, you know, the music that didn't resonate. So you mean pressure like from culture or like somebody, your mentors
Oh,
or
I mean, definitely a lot of the people that I had in my life at the time, uh, former sort of partner, ex-husband who, that wasn't really a real relationship, but that's a whole other interview by itself. Friends, family, producers I was working with at the time, I think that and I don't know that it was necessarily anything of nefarious intent or anything like that. I just feel like, people that are related to you or are involved in your life feel somehow there's a little bit of a narcissistic perspective, especially with family, I think, where they think somehow that the music you write reflects on them. And, in certain ways it does, of
yeah.
course, if I'm writing about how I felt growing up and things like that, and they don't like to hear the truth of some of those darker themes. Um, and that's unfortunate, but I always kind of felt pressure to put on this, kind of happy persona and everything. And I sang opera in college. And so there was always the issue of like, the big voice and kind of working around that, especially when I kind of ventured into writing my own music, my own songs and everything. And I think people wanted to hear a pretty voice singing pretty happy songs. And I wanted to utilize that part of my voice, but also test the limits of it to not be so pretty, so perfect all the time. And so I wanted to kind of really step outside of that. And it was really tough for me to do because I was always, I kind of felt like a lot of the things that I was writing at the time, and again, this was like 10, 15 years ago, I kind of felt like, well, maybe I'm just not good. Maybe this isn't good enough. And, people just don't like the stuff that I write naturally. And since I've kind of stepped away from some of those people in my life that were kind of holding me back artistically, and decided to just kind of do the things that I wanted to do, I feel like I've written maybe the best songs that I have ever written. There's only a couple that have survived from my 20s for sure. Um, and I just don't relate to some of the things I was writing back then anymore. And, now I feel like I'm being really more honest lyrically, melodically, and really truly expressing the things that I always needed to, that I didn't even know I needed to express when I was younger because
Mm,
I was so busy. And this is so true of women, especially, where we're always just so busy thinking that we really have to um, please everyone around us before we're doing anything for ourselves.
right.
And so that's also just been kind of a common theme and thread in the stuff I've been writing currently. And of course, I'm always my own worst critic and super hard on myself. So I'm always striving to like write something better and get better at piano and all of this. And, but yeah, I definitely felt a lot of pressure from the people around me at the time that were in my life. And, that there's a lot of very predatory, like Nashville producers especially when you first move here. And I definitely had a lot of experience with that also. And some of those things weren't pleasant, and they're just kind of trying to, instead of help you do anything really artistic, what they're trying to do is force you to be as marketable as possible.
Right.
If they see any kind of
Yeah.
talent or potential there, for something to, become more mainstream or
Mm.
whatever, then obviously they benefit from that. So that was also a big part of it too. Some of the producers that I was working with when I was much younger were always kind of trying to get me to, you know, be more mainstream, write more happy pop stuff and that kind of thing. And I was just like, well, I just don't, that's I'm not a dancer, and I'm not super extroverted, so it's probably best if y'all just let me be myself
Right.
for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna
But yeah.
say, that naturally, I was, oh, because I don't know very much, about the
Mhm.
industry. It's, oh, it must be, a great place to be surrounded by musicians and the hot spot. And but interesting that you pointed out that, maybe they're
Yeah,
so focused on these end goals, and
true,
that's
true.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's good and bad everywhere,
Mm,
and,
sure.
there's certainly a sense of community in Nashville. You just have to find your tribe.
Yeah.
You have to find, uh, like, your people, and there are people here who really wanna make art that really resonates and really stands out. I mean, I mean, like we're talking people like Jake Wesley Rogers, who's incredible, and like Maddie Diaz, who just did this huge tour opening for Harry Styles, and she's been in the
Mm,
industry and been doing her thing and doing the sync licensing stuff and everything for years. I've been a fan of Maddie Diaz for since like I don't know 2010 or something, a long time. So there's a lot of people here that have just been working and doing their thing and making really beautiful art that just is maybe just right outside of a lot of the mainstream kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people here that aren't doing country music at all.
right.
They're artists. They do all kinds of different music. And so there is that aspect of it. And there are some really cool people here. You just have to find them. And it's tough when when I first moved here, I had moved out here from California, and I was really
Mm,
green and I didn't know anyone aside of like the producer that had contacted me on
right.
MySpace. I'm gonna date myself right now. Back when I had a MySpace page. Um, so I kind of felt like I was grasping at straws, and I kind of felt like, I had to take every opportunity that came to me because nobody knew who I was, and, that kind of thing. And I didn't really recognize that, oh, I can actually just make whatever I want and I'm in charge. And so, but, the partner that I have now, my husband now, is a drummer, and he tours a lot and everything, and he and I have been kind of creating stuff together, and that's been really fun. And I'm just kind of, like I said, always learning, and I've definitely learned so much more about music production and producing my own stuff. So that's been really helpful for me, just being able to get things out there the way that I want.
Nice. That's great. And just I think, because I know a little bit already from looking at your music, but to provide some context for whoever's watching, do you want to talk a little bit
Mhm.
about maybe just overview, or you can go as deep as you want. I
Mhm.
doesn't matter to me. Um, and just kind of provide us some context of your past and the things, the songs you write about, I guess.
Oh, sure. Well, um,
Because once they
all
start
right.
listening, they would be like, "Oh, what is this about?" Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I'm working on trying to kind of rebrand everything right now,
Mm,
and just kind of working on a full length album
mm,
at the moment. And just kind of the underlying theme is just sort of dealing with a lot of the trauma that kind of really impacted me just from growing up. I was in therapy for a long time, and while speaking with the psychologist I was going to see, he had actually, obviously, I had already been diagnosed with ADHD, and that was something that my mother had let me in on when my nephew, my sister's son, started presenting with symptoms of ADHD, and his
Mm.
teachers were like, "Hey, you should possibly get this kid tested. We think he's neurodivergent." And you know, my sister was kind of complaining about it or whatever, and my mother looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, they said the same thing to me about you when you were a kid." And I was like, "What?" um, you didn't bother to tell me this ever? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I made awesome grades in school because I was smart, and I was in, like, the AP program and all that stuff, but it was very hard for me to pay attention and to focus, and I had to, like, really force myself to do stuff, and I was never organized. I was always doing things at the very last minute. I loved learning itself, but I was always very overwhelmed at school, especially the social aspect of it. Did not ever feel like I fit in with my peers, and overall, I just had like a really, really tough time. So around the time that I was in my mid 30s, I went to see someone and was actually diagnosed with ADHD after doing a really long assessment. And then a couple of years later, the psychologist I was seeing was like, a lot of people who have ADHD also are on the autism spectrum. Used to be called Asperger's, but I think you might be like at a level 1 autism spectrum disorder. And I was like, okay, I had never really thought of that. But then I started doing this deep dive into um, symptoms of women with autism and girls with autism. And I aligned with every single thing that they have now discovered for young girls who were, autistic. And growing up, it just being bullied a lot, especially like elementary school, middle school, was really, really tough on me. High school, I had just kind of learned to be quiet
Mm.
and a bit of a wallflower. So it was a little bit easier for me. And I just had my certain friends who I now realize I'm still friends with some of the people that I went to high school with. And a lot of them are neurodivergent as
Right.
well, the people that I get along with. So that's always really funny. But yeah, it was suggested to me, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just go ahead and get, um, assessed for this as well. And, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to prove to this psychiatrist that I'm not autistic. And I did. It took about 2 months to get fully assessed. And there were like several appointments in person. And then there were also a lot of like written assessments and things like that that I had to do. And, she was talking to me about all kinds of things from like special interest to eye contact to, um, well, do you have like sensory things that bother you? And I was like, no, I don't have sensory things that bother me, as I was, a 39-year-old woman wearing my socks inside out because the seams bother me. And so I was kind of just telling her, like, I was like, well, I can't I can't stand dishes in the sink, and I can't stand anything slimy, and I can't stand tags in my clothes, and I can't I can't ever have bangs because I can't stand it when my hair is right over my eyebrow. Like, that's just ridiculous. And just like silly things. And I was just kind of listing, and once I started, I
Mm.
couldn't stop. And she was like, and this particular psychiatrist was also on the spectrum as well. So I thought, well, if anybody's going to be able to, you know, tell me I'm not, it's her. And sure enough, at the end of the 2 months, I got back her full written assessment, and it was, uh, she thinks she has autism spectrum disorder. This is consistent with that diagnosis, the symptoms that she presents. And then she also had diagnosed me with PTSD and major depressive disorder. And a lot of that is just like PTSD from being a neurodivergent person and trying to function within the parameters of a more neurotypical world. And so that kind of started me on a path. And while I was growing up, unfortunately, I was the oldest in my family. And so it was just kind of, my mother didn't know any better. Her mother kind of did, her parents parentified her and did a lot of the same stuff to her. But I always kind of felt like I was on the outside looking in with my family. And I always felt very much like I was just there to kind of help my mother. I didn't really feel like I was her daughter. I had a lot of responsibility growing up. My parents weren't rich, and so they had to both work a lot. And I didn't spend my summers doing fun things. I spent my summers, 8 to 10 hours a day, babysitting my brothers and sisters, cleaning the house, cooking, making sure they didn't kill each other because they were closer in age and younger than me, and they fought a lot. Um, and so there was just a lot. And not knowing that I was autistic, I was always kind of struggling to just like remember everything and try to get straight A's because I would get in trouble if like my grades weren't excellent because I was supposed to be so smart and all of this stuff. And it just was a lot of pressure just kind of constantly. And my mother is she's a very traumatized person. She's been through a lot in her life. I won't go into that because that's her story to tell, obviously, and everything. And I do really deeply love her and feel for her regarding what she went through. And so I don't think that she kind of meant to do the same thing to me, but she definitely did. And I was always kind of super hyper vigilant about her emotional well-being growing up. And my dad is very much on the spectrum and undiagnosed, and I don't think that he knows it, but he absolutely, absolutely is autistic. Right down to like the classic train obsession. I mean, just very has his special interests and things like that. And so he threw a lot of like really angry, pretty abusive tantrums and stuff when I was growing up. And whereas, women sort of internalize those meltdowns and become quieter and quieter, men are usually like the opposite. And my dad, I just think, has never had any real help for his mental health. And so it was just like a really volatile situation all the time. Like you just kind of never knew when somebody was going to get angry or kind of blow up. And a lot of verbal and emotional abuse, but definitely sometimes physical as well. And so was pretty tough. And like I said, again, they both have a lot of trauma and just have not really done the work to be able to deal with that and not hurt other people, especially their kids, I think, and especially me because I was the oldest and there was so much expectation of me. Um, and so I kind of felt like in a lot of ways I was set up because I was set up to be, you know, this kind of very people pleasing, perfectionist, like always trying to do everything for everybody else and not really considering how it would affect me type of thing. So that by the time I was a teenager, I was incredibly lonely and I really felt very unseen and very unheard. And, music was the only thing that made me feel better. Um, and then when I was in high school, I was groomed by my high school teacher, my high school AP English teacher, starting at the beginning of my senior year. And I didn't really understand at the time what that was or what was happening to me because when somebody is grooming you into a sexual relationship with them, they are making you think that, oh, well, he's 34 years older than me. He was like 51 when I was 17. So pretty gross. Um, but when someone is grooming you like that, they make you believe that it's your idea, that you are somehow seducing them. I was a 17-year-old autistic virgin, so that probably wasn't what was happening. And now I realize that. Um, and, but they really do make you think that, oh, you're so special, you're so mature for your age. I've just never felt like this about any other student I've ever had, blah, blah, blah. And because I really didn't feel like I had my parents to turn to, when the knowledge of this like secret sort of relationship came to light, it was very bad for me in particular. He didn't really suffer a lot of consequences because he's a man, but I was basically ostracized from my entire town where I attended high school. And my own parents were having like private detectives follow me around and stuff like that. I basically left home with like my cat and some of my stuff, like the shirt and clothes on my back, and slept on friends' couches and stuff for many months before grabbing a, saving money and getting an apartment with a friend. It was a lot. A lot of stuff occurred, and it was very, I didn't even really understand how traumatizing it was for me, but I had a lot of panic attacks and stuff throughout my 20s. And I ended up staying with that man because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And I didn't have anyone else I felt like I could call, because I felt so alone. And the shame that was put upon me, where I was treated like I was some sort of home wrecker. Um, this was well before the Me Too movement or any of that. So nobody really understood what grooming was. And, women are blamed whenever they come forward about anything. And I thought I was in love with this person. I didn't realize that he had been manipulating me all this time. And I only recently, a couple of months ago, actually, right before Thanksgiving, actually, had a classmate of mine. She graduated the year before I did. And we had been in like, we didn't run in the same circles or anything. She's a bit more popular than me and played sports and all that stuff, but we were actually in band together. Um, and I really looked up to her and everything in high school. And she recently came forward and let me know that this man had done the same thing to her the year before. So even though in the back of my mind I knew that I probably wasn't the only one that he had done this to, after getting away from him and having 10 years of perspective and all that, um, to be presented with it in such a black and white way, and to have this like irrefutable evidence that I was not the only person that he did this to, and he probably did it to someone every year that he taught. And it was like his thing, because he grew more and more resentful and angry with me as the years went on and we kind of were together or whatever. So now I'm realizing that it's because I took away his opportunity to groom other young women, and that what he really wanted was to mess around with teenage girls and abuse them. So I understand all of that now, and I didn't back then. And it's only, I've only really just begun to understand it in the past like 2 years, really. And then obviously getting my autism diagnosis last year, around February when I turned 40, was very eye opening as well, because you tend to be a lot more trusting and gullible, and you have a tendency to feel really ostracized and alone growing up that way, and not and feeling like something's wrong with you, but not understanding what that is. And he made me feel like I was special. And I think that would be very seductive for anyone, even analytic young individual. So that all kind of made it into just the perfect storm, and it just ended up being probably the greatest trauma of my life, and I am still really working through it. And having that classmate of mine come forward and tell me this happened to her as well, and she was apologizing and saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't report him so that you didn't have to go through all of this, etc." And I was just like, as much as I was blamed, I don't blame you for not coming forward, because it would have been just as awful for you, you know. Um, but I'm trying to reframe a lot of it, even though he kind of stole a lot of years of my life. And that is something that I'm definitely expressing a lot of in my music, is how much time that I lost, all of my 20s, really. I didn't have carefree childhood. I didn't have carefree teenage years. I did not have carefree 20s at all, like most people do. So when I came out of that relationship at almost 30 years old, I still felt like I was 19 and I still felt very behind. And, um, that's when I decided, well, I'm going to take a step back from trying to, you know, do music and all this stuff. And I'm just really going to like reevaluate uh, what any of this means to me and what my life is about. And about 8 years went by. And once I started writing music again, this all started to come out. It was really just, you know, things happen in their own time. And I really just needed to understand and recognize and come to terms with what had happened to me and what was taken from me. And that at the end of the day, it didn't break me. I got away. Not only did I get away from him, but I've been reframing this to myself lately where I'm like, I stopped him. Because he didn't come away from that situation totally unscathed. He didn't go to jail because at the time, and I will be regretful of this until I go to my grave, but as a 19-year-old girl who had been groomed by this person 2 years prior while I was still a student of his and being in this like secret relationship, I protected him because I thought I was in love with him. So he didn't go to jail, but he did lose his teaching license. And so at the end of the day, when I think about this, I try to remind myself that even though I had to kind of fall on the sword to do it and I lost so much of my life to him, he didn't get to do it to anybody else. So I stopped him in a way, even though I suffered a lot for it. But that's a lot of, you know, I don't, maybe this is all too personal to talk about, but I've spent so many years of my life being silent and being ashamed and carrying shame that wasn't even mine. And I didn't even realize that it wasn't mine to carry. And so now I'm just kind of talking about it and writing it in my music because there are so many young women out there that are being taught this ridiculous narrative that older women are jealous of younger women. Not true. That, men will always like want to gravitate towards younger women. And yeah, the gross ones do. Um, and also that, you know, male attention in any shape or form is better than no attention. Also not true. So I'm just really trying to be very open and honest in my music and still kind of provide a thread of hope in there that like if this has happened to you, it there's nothing wrong with you. You didn't do it. That shame isn't yours to carry. You can let that go. You can feel your anger and your rage about it. You don't have to silence yourself or muzzle yourself. And you can use that anger and go forward and reclaim your power and not give it away to anybody else ever again. And we tend to do that a lot when we're younger, give our power away, especially to people that are older. And I think it's really important, especially for young women, to understand that a lot of these older men, you know, they're not even as smart as you are. There's this thing we do, especially when you are neurodivergent, where you think everyone knows better than you all the time. And you have a real tendency to I don't want to say it's gullibility, but I just think it's this thing where we have a tendency to like regress and certain things when we're just kind of trying to figure things out. And I always just did this thing where that again, it's that people pleasing thing that I grew up with, where I just always felt like I had to just defer to everyone around me, even if I disagreed. And I am just so far from that person now. And what I really want to inspire in other young women is you have the power right now. Don't give it away to anybody else, And if that man says you're just so mature for your age, run. That's not a thing. That just means that nobody his age wants anything to do with him. So, you just have to kind of figure things out on your own, and that it's okay to have solitude. It's okay to, spend some time alone and really focus on not just loving yourself, but liking yourself. Because I don't, sometimes I wake up and I know that I love myself, but I'm like, I just don't really like myself very much today. Today, it's hard to be me or whatever, and I think everybody feels that to a certain degree. And I just feel like everyone is trying to achieve this um, perfect platform of happiness where they're just never going to feel anything bad or have any adversity or have to solve a problem ever again. And life just doesn't really work that way. You really just, it ebbs and flows and you go through waves. And I think really just learning to support yourself through those kind of, you know, emotional hurricanes here and there is just, that's just all part of it. Just all part of, you know, figuring out who you are. And I think that if you're doing it right, you're never going to really get to a place where you're like, oh, I figured it all out. To me, that's kind of the ultimate arrogance. I fully plan on being on my deathbed and I'm still learning something. So that is a lot of what this experience has taught me. And so I'm just really now, when I sit down to write something, especially if I usually sit down at the piano when I'm not feeling so hot and not feeling good about myself and really feeling like I need to let something out, but I don't really know, another way that's, to express it that would be as healthy as this. And, so that's kind of what I'm trying to do is just be as radically honest with myself as I possibly can. And music has been a really wonderful outlet to do that. So
Lovely. I really appreciate you sharing all that. It must,
yeah, no
yeah,
problem.
yeah,
I'm just like, I'm gonna be 41 at the end of this month, and I'm just kind of like done running and done hiding from myself, and I'm not gonna be ashamed of my experiences or the things that have happened to me because they have shaped who I am, and I like who I am
yeah,
now. So yeah,
yeah,
it's interesting
yeah.
how
And it,
trauma changes you and
yeah,
causes you to have great empathy for other people and the world at large and just really being able to see things for what they are.
I
So
love that. Yeah. And I think,
yeah,
it's also interesting to see how it's quite a recent discovery. Like, it's been so
yeah,
long, right? And it's only
yeah,
after grew up, after a lot of things have happened, you're like, wait a second, maybe things are not
yeah.
what you thought, right? So
It takes a
that's,
long time, especially as women, we're kind of sold a lie. As someone who was autistic and didn't know it, I've always had this like really firm sense of justice my whole life. And I remember being as young as like 8 years old and thinking, I don't ever want to have kids. I don't want to be forced to do something that I don't want to do. I don't even know if I want to be married necessarily. And I've sort of always been like that. And as I've gotten older, you have so many people say things to you like, "Oh, you'll change your mind," and this and that because, uh, for some reason, if you're a woman, you just can't possibly know yourself, and what
mm,
you want, but no one would ever say that
mm,
to, someone who is male, if they don't wanna have kids, it's like, "Oh, well, fine. That's all," no big deal. But for women, it's this whole other thing of like, "Oh, well, you'll never know real love or whatever," and it's just like, "Really?" Because I think maybe the person who traumatized me the most were my parents.
mm,
So it's just interesting to me that people have this mindset, with women, and so I just really I've always had this very strong sense of who I was, and even growing up with like these people pleasing tendencies, I always sort of compartmentalized part of myself
mm,
and was just like, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. And then as I got older, I'm looking around and I'm seeing all of these women, and there are some women who are just meant to be mothers and they're perfectly happy and that's what they wanted to do and that's great. But I don't know if you've seen the regretful parents thread on Reddit, but that's some heavy birth control. There's a lot of people that, especially women, who are like,
mm,
I'm doing everything. I'm working a full time job and then I'm coming home and I'm cleaning and I'm cooking and I'm taking care of the kids. And my husband doesn't lift a finger, and it's not helpful for somebody to just take the trash out once a week. So and I grew up in a household where that was very much true. My dad basically wanted a trophy if he did the dishes or something, whereas usually I did the dishes every night for a family of
Mm,
five. And it every time he did a load of laundry or did anything, he just really expected like this, I don't know, a parade.
mm,
And it was stuff that my mom just did every day, or I did mostly for her, because I didn't want her to have to do it, because she was always carrying such a heavy load, and she had a lot of mental health issues, and a lot of trauma. And so you kind of you see that growing up a lot, and then you realize, especially once you get over the age of about 35 as a woman, there's just this thing that happens to you where you're like, oh, we were all duped into thinking that you know being in a romantic relationship and having a man like pay attention to you or be in love with you is like, if you don't have that, there's something wrong with you, and there's something missing about you, and all of this stuff, which is again why I think I was so duped by this man that was so much older than me, who was able to groom me quite easily, because I was just already sort of in that place from how I grew up, and also that cultural general brainwashing that happens to women, where we're all taught that like your purpose, basically, if you're born female, assigned female at birth, is to get married and have kids and all this stuff. And it's just like the most ridiculous thing, as if women can't do other things. And there are many examples of that throughout history, and many examples throughout history of women and their accomplishments that have been erased by men.
mm,
And so I just think that's a big part of why grooming is so insidious and so really dangerous to the psyche, because you don't realize what's happening to you at the time. I've seen a lot of, people come forward on social media, young women that are like, yeah, my own father did this to me. And I just, for years, didn't think anything of it. Like, obviously, it was weird. And I didn't really I had a lot of anxiety, and I lost my ability to be extroverted, and I became very withdrawn, and like I wasn't eating, but I still didn't think, oh, well, it's this person that's abusing me that's causing this,
mm,
reaction in me. And I was the same. It's unfortunate that the statute of limitations is what it is, because I don't think there should be a limit on it, because I didn't even realize any of this stuff until I was in my late 30s, and really just this past few months, when I, had the other student come forward and let me know that it had also been done to her by the same person. It just hit me like a truck, and I've been really reeling from that, and just trying to deal with all of it, and everything. So I've had to take a lot of mental health breaks, and just kind of, you know, try my best to wrap my head around all of this, because it's really, really hard to look back at every little moment that you inadvertently shared with this person who was manipulating you the whole time, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and you didn't know, because you were innocent, and that innocence was taken from you and exploited in so many ways. um so yeah, it's really interesting to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture, when you just, for so long, you really just didn't understand. And I didn't understand why I was so anxious my whole life,
mm,
even well into my early 30s and everything. I was just like, gosh, I'm just the most anxious person. And it's because my body was giving me signals
mm,
on what had occurred, because my body and my nervous system understood things that I
mm,
logically couldn't with my brain yet, because your brain protects you from trauma. That's
right.
what complex PTSD and PTSD is. Your
Mm,
brain is like compartmentalizing things. And then, I just thought, oh, well, it's just me. I'm just weird that I have nightmares every single night. Like, I don't know why. That's just me. It's weird. My brain's weird. You don't really understand. what's happening. But then once you start to, and once you start to talk about it, then it becomes very cathartic. And if you're able to try and make something out of that, not that that's a requirement or anything, nobody should feel like they have to use their trauma to make art, but if you can, I've found it to be very helpful for me, for sure.
Right.
So
Yeah. So would you, I was gonna ask you something, but then I'll eventually
I'm
get to
sorry.
it. No, 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 no. Because this is I'm thinking about now. As you're healing, um,
Mhm,
there's the two elements that I'm thinking about. One is obviously the music, and the
mhm,
other part that I wondered about, and is your current partner, husband,
mhm,
and because you
mhm.
talk about learning to stand on your own, and how do
Right.
you think having just found him and having him around, how that influences that healing process?
Well, it's interesting because he and I have been together for, I guess, about 9 years now.
Mm,
Well, it was 9 years this past September, so I guess it'll be 10 years this year. So almost a decade. And it's funny that you mentioned that because he understood what I had gone through before I did. When he
oh,
and I first started dating, I used to lie to people, and when I told them about my ex, I would say, "Oh well, he was my college professor, and we got together, and he was a lot older than me, or whatever," because I was trying to again, you know, the dangerous part about grooming is it instills in you
mm,
this need to protect the person who is being predatory towards you, because it's like a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing. Um, and so that's what I would tell people. But even knowing that, and knowing how much older he was, Kevin was like, that doesn't sit right with me. That's weird. And he even told his daughter, my stepdaughter Madison, she was like 18 or something at the time. She's 27 now. But, he was like, you know, she's been through some stuff, and, she was with this guy, and I don't think that she understands that he's a piece of shit. And I don't say anything to her about it, you know, like, just don't, we're not going to talk about that. That's something she's got to figure out on her own. And I started to figure it out on my own. um, so, a few years ago, and I was, talking to Maddie one day while I was kind of, you know, her dad was out of town touring, and so she and I were home, and we had gone out and done something, and we had gotten back to the house, and Maddie and I always get to talking. We always end up having these like really beautiful, deep conversations. And she told me that she was like, yeah, at the beginning of your relationship, right before my dad introduced us to each other, back at like the end of 2015 or whatever, she was like, he kind of told me not to say anything about this. And it hit me just like a ton of bricks in that moment, where I was like, oh my God, other people could see this before could see it. And I still hadn't even told Kevin the truth that this was my high school teacher. And once Maddie and I had that conversation, I kind of sat down with him and kind of told him the truth of what really happened. And he sat back, and he looked at me, and we were just sitting on the couch in there in the living room, and he just kind of turned to me, and I started to cry when he said this, but he looked at me, and he was like, I've been waiting a really long time for you to begin to understand what this man did to you. And so it was a conclusion that he allowed me to come to on my own. And he still did not put any ideas into my head, didn't force me to try to talk about it or any of that. I got back into therapy at that point and really started to try and explore some of that. But mostly in therapy, I was talking about like my parents and that sort of thing. I still really wouldn't even broach the subject of this teacher, and all of the years that I spent thinking that we were some great love story when he knew all along what he had done. Um, that's really tough to deal with. I really think about how naive I was and how much I tried to do for him, and how I was always trying to prove my worthiness, all that time. And, so with Kevin, it was just my current partner, my current husband, Kevin, it was just a long process. And he has kind of allowed me to just come to it in my own time. And, we kind of eat edibles together in the evening and have snacks and, kind of watch TV. And he's also neurodivergent, has ADHD and stuff too. So we kind of just get into, much like I do with his daughter, it's also the same with him, where we get into like these really heavy sort of philosophical conversations a lot of the time. And he has just watched me kind of unravel this thread over the past, like, 3 years or so, and really start to come to terms with all of this and understand it. And we have a lot of heart to hearts about it, where I'll, just kind of be sitting around, and I'll just have these like sort of huge epiphanies, and just realizing like, wow, this is like, I was in a dangerous situation and I didn't even know it. This man was a predator and I took away his hunting ground, basically. Like, I absolutely have no doubt that there was a lot of resentment towards me, and that had I not, been involved in the music industry and had such a public, life here in Nashville, I don't know if I don't know what he would have done. I don't know that I would still be here. So that's a lot to kind of come to terms with. And so Kevin and I talk a lot about this, to be honest. And, he's got his own traumas and stuff as well, from when, he was growing up and basically was abandoned on a farm by his own parents. And so, we talk a lot about this stuff, and there has just been such a huge shift with both of us, where, we have very much evolved, together, and we have both just kind of really leveled up in many ways. And so we spend a lot of time, like, really just talking through things, and it's fun. Sometimes it's painful, obviously, because the subject matter is painful, but it's really wonderful to be with someone who is evolving at the same, rate that you are, and you're just both discovering things about yourselves and life and the world and culture, and you're just kind of realizing how conditioned we all are, in the first place, just, overall. And so we definitely talk a lot about this, and it's been so healing for me just to have someone that I can kind of turn to, that is so close with me. And I've just been, you know, now I have a partner that I don't have to hide from. I don't have to prove myself to. Like, I can just be the little goblin that I am on the couch, and like just be myself. I don't always have to be this like perfect version of who I am. He lets me be messy. And that is why I have been able to start creating from that place with my music. And I want to get messier. So that's my aim. So I
Nice.
think from now on.
I look forward to
For
that.
sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
thanks.
I think that's really beautiful and touching. Like
Thank
I saw
you.
you pause, and I had tears in my eyes too. That I think, especially the moment in which, and just the idea of how he knew something, but he really allowed you to discover for yourself. I think
Yeah.
it's I don't think I've experienced that personally, but I don't think it's a
Mhm.
thing that people ever talk about, this idea
Right.
of supporting someone without,
Yeah.
and knowing, right, knowing
Yeah.
better, but giving them that
Yeah.
space to discover themselves.
Yep.
It's so empowering to be there for the support and encourage
Yep.
you to discover yourself. And I think that's
Yeah.
and I love how you mentioned how, most men, they kind of, going to tell you off, and they're going to know
Yeah.
better. But here's the man that you found that, um gave you that and
Yeah,
allowed you to discover. And that's super
he did.
beautiful. That's really,
Yeah.
really beautiful.
Yeah, it was a pretty it was a really huge life-changing moment for me, recognizing that he had just kind of been sitting on that information for years. Um, and knowing that if he were to be like, "Hey, this is actually what has occurred," knowing that I was so deep in my own denial of
Mm,
this because I was so, when you're groomed by someone, um, it's brainwashing.
mm.
You are brainwashed,
Yeah.
period. And so I was not only was I in denial and not only was I brainwashed, but I had this full ability to just gaslight myself, to even just believe um, the lies that I was telling other people about this person. Oh, he was my college professor, or this or that. And it was just, God, it feels so good to tell the truth now because for so long I lived in that place of shame, thinking that I had seduced this much older man and that it was all my fault, that he had lost his teaching career because of me and
Mm,
all this stuff, and I just really didn't understand that none of that was my fault. He did that to himself, and it's very, very tough for me to be able to see that. But once I started to, then Kevin was like, "Yep." I've just been waiting here, waiting for you to come around. And the second that I did, he was right there to support me and let me know that I was seen and I was heard, and that he had kind of come to that conclusion long before I did. But he knew that he couldn't just dump it in my lap because it's like, you know, anybody that's like a teenager and thinks that they know best, and they are, maybe they're dating someone their own age that's not good for them, or they have like a friend that's not good for them or whatever. You can't just say that. You can't just tell them, "Hey, this person's bad for you," because, we get chemically involved with our emotions, like, and there is a withdrawal thing that happens regarding dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and all of those neurotransmitters that tell us, that you're bonded with someone, even if it's like a trauma bond. You don't realize that as it's happening. And to have someone suddenly say to you, "Well, you can't trust your own feelings about this.
right.
You can't trust this current viewpoint of your experience." That's really tough for someone to take, especially when they've been groomed, especially when they're so deep in the denial of it. And what I did was I just kind of decided to sort of like build my life around this lie and this just denial of everything, and just I didn't want to be a victim. I really just did not. I did not want people to feel sorry for me.
Mm,
I did not want people to look at me as like, "Oh, this person who was duped and, just lied to and manipulated and everything." Like, I just did not want people to see me that way. And to me, it felt like, I was making myself powerless if I allowed anyone to see me
mm,
as anything but having autonomy and agency over my own life and my own choices, even from a very young age. And you got to remember, from like, you know, as young as 5, 6, 7 years old, I was treated like a little mini adult
yeah.
by my parents. So I was always like 12 going on 40, I even at almost 41, I don't feel that much different than I did at 19, as far as like, obviously I just have a much bigger view of the world, and I know a lot more stuff now. But, I still had so much anxiety back then, and feeling like I had to just achieve and accomplish and please everyone around me and all that stuff. And that is really the only thing that's changed, is knowing now that I can live my life for myself, and yeah, having a partner who was willing to allow me to come to that on my own terms was really wonderful. And then once I did, and then I had that like strong support from him, and then I started writing all these songs and everything, it really just felt like I was I had to burn every part of myself to the ground, every part of me that believed anything that that man ever said to me. And I had to rebuild my whole entire life, and I had to really figure out, well, who am I? who am I without the constant influence of other people making me feel like I have to be a certain way, or I have to mask, or I have to, I can't just be the little, autistic weirdo that I am, and being just leaning into that, and really trying to understand, well, what does it mean to just be yourself, And I think truly that that's a lifetime discovery. It never really stops.
Right.
So,
Beautiful. And so now it's great that you talked about that, because then the next part I'm wondering about is how has, because you mentioned you've been doing music for quite a while. You
yeah,
grew
true.
up doing music when it's super.
I
When did
did.
you start like playing piano? Just as a context.
Well, I actually, my dad was really big into like marching band when he was in high
Oh, okay.
school. Did marching band, honor band, all that good stuff, and he really loved it. And I think it was, I think growing up undiagnosed, like, and not really understanding all that stuff. I think that was just something that really resonated with him, and music became a special interest to
Oh,
him.
yeah.
Um, he played saxophone in band and stuff, and he just wanted that experience for me. So, and I think it was a little bit living vicariously type of a thing. And
Mm,
it's a big thing among like boomers, where it's like, you're going to do this because I did it,
right.
and blah, blah, blah. So when I was in sixth grade, he marched me down to Janus Music in Lake Charles, Louisiana, where I am from, and was like, pick out an instrument. You're going to be in band. And, I was like in middle school at the time. And I was like, okay. So I decided, well, this clarinet is really pretty and makes cool sounds. So I'm going to learn that. And he literally forced me to practice every day. And I sat there with my little music book, learning how to read music at home with my little metal fold up music stand that I actually still have. And by the time I started sixth grade, this was the summer before I started middle school. By the time I started sixth grade, I was almost a half a year ahead of everybody. I didn't realize that day one of school, they were going to be like, this is the treble clef. Like, I already knew how to
Right.
read music because I had taught myself, because he was like, you're going to practice this clarinet for an hour every day. And I was like, okay. And it was very stressful. And I was just like, I guess, okay. And so, obviously, by the time I started school, I was like first chair clarinet and the whole thing, because I could read music a lot better than every other one of my classmates. And I was like, oh crap. But then, three-quarters of the way through the year or whatever, everybody finally caught up and we were all kind of on the same level. So I did band for many years, and by the time I was in high school, I never really knew I could sing. Had no idea, and I would sing sometimes, and I was like, I love singing. It feels really good. Singing is actually a really incredible activity for regulating the nervous
Mm.
system, especially if you are constantly dysregulated.
I should try.
So you should. It's really fun. So I used to sing to myself a lot, but I was too shy to sing in front of other people
Mm.
or anything. And I was always taught that, like, being in choir and stuff is like, it's whatever, it's, you really want to play an instrument and all that. Again, boomer parents. So I never thought that much about it, but around my sophomore year, I had a lot of friends who were in choir and band, and had asked me to sing with them or something. And I was sitting around with two friends of mine in high school. I remember we were just like sitting in the bleachers one day I think we were at band practice taking a break, and one of the girls was in Camerata Choir, which was the advanced choir at the time, and I just kind of started singing along with her. She was singing something, maybe it was like a Fiona Apple song or something like that. I don't know, I'm old. And I started singing along with her because I really loved the song. And they both stopped and just kind of turned and looked at me. And I was like, oh God, I'm terrible. I'm awful. I should never open my mouth ever again. And she kind of tilted her head to the side and she was like, you need to try out for choir. Like, holy shit, you can sing. And I was like, I didn't know that. So I did, and I ended up doing that. And then I loved it so much. Obviously I loved being in band and in marching band and everything and did the honor band thing and all that good stuff. But I really truly loved being in choir. And then I was making like the honor and regional choirs as well, where you're doing stuff at like a college level. It's almost like camp in between, you know, during the holidays and stuff, when school's out and all that. And so I ended up doing all that like my sophomore year. I was like, I'm not gonna do band next year. I'm gonna just fully commit the last couple of years of high school to just being in choir. And I did that and it was awesome. And then my senior year, I realized like if I'm gonna be a music major in college, like I need to start learning piano. And also I
Um,
was very, very enamored with Tori Amos and absolutely loved her music. I mean, she could literally make a Baroque style piano part just, sound absolutely modern and incredible. And, we all know now she's a legend,
yeah.
of course, and she's forever my holy grail favorite artist. I can't ever go more than a few like weeks without listening to some Tori and forever inspires me. And no one will ever be as talented as her anyway. So I really wanted to learn how to play piano because of her. And also, I grew up redheaded, and I was the only redhead in my family. And Tori was a brunette that dyed her hair red on purpose. And I was like, why would you ever do that? That's
Oh,
crazy.
I didn't know that.
Like
Okay.
people make fun of me for having orange hair. This is so weird. But she made me feel good about
Um,
being myself, and obviously she's just an incredible musician. And so I was like, my senior year, I had to do a senior project. And I decided that my senior project was going to be learning piano and starting to write my own songs. And I got the second highest grade in my class for
wow,
my senior project that year. So it worked out really well.
awesome.
And so yeah, I started teaching myself. I took a few lessons, but I mostly just taught myself piano starting when I was around 18 or so. So
That's
yeah,
cool. Wow.
yeah.
That's a
I'm
such an
still, I'm
exciting story. Sorry, continue.
Thanks. I'm currently trying to get better at like sight reading for piano because that was something I just never did. I already understood a lot about music theory and everything, so I never really got too much I was too busy and too impatient as a teenager, and I was always like, oh man, I just want to write songs, and piano's so interesting. And piano is just like a pattern that repeats over and over. So I was just like
Mm,
enamored with it, and I felt like, well, I kind of understand this instrument. So whatever. And I was so tired of sight reading from band and stuff. And now that I'm older, I'm like, "Ugh, there's a lot of classical stuff that I want to play, and I
uh,
don't want to just do it by ear and memorize stuff." So I'm currently like going back to a lot of
mm.
basics, and very humbling to realize that, like, man, reading just treble clef when you play like clarinet or something is very easy compared to reading bass and treble clef at the same time, and
Mm,
also trying to like remember all these little things about music theory that I've just, kind of forgotten over the years or didn't really utilize as often as I should have. So now I'm kind of, yeah, I'm humiliating myself on purpose. I'm just sitting, if anybody's mad at me, just know I'm just sitting at home in front of my piano going like this, like literally, like just fucking squinting and just like wondering what the hell I'm doing with my life.
well,
So
it's called learning, right? As you have said yourself.
it
Yes.
is. And I
Yeah.
just always want to be learning and trying to improve at things that, I neglected for a long time because I was going through a hard time. I was always in survival mode. And now
Mm,
that I'm not, and now
yeah.
I'm just like, oh wow, I have energy to do other things that I always wanted to learn. So that's been really fun for me. And I'm enjoying kind of doing that. And also just being at home with my dogs.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
My
amazing.
favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So
It's cool to see how you started songwriting so far back, and you were good at it,
mhm.
clearly. Um, Curious,
Thanks.
how has the songwriting process? Because people talk about how you know it's a whole thing to learn, and how has the
Hmm.
songwriting, learning to write your song, and the processing your trauma and trying to
Hmm.
express yourself honestly, right? Because I think that's a very,
Yeah.
yeah, talk a bit about that.
Well, I it's interesting is when I first started writing, and I had also just started learning piano, so I couldn't really I was kind of just like playing basic chords and just kind of doing stuff like that. And I was very, very interested in creating kind of strange melodies. And I was already doing kind of the same thing I'm doing now when I was much younger. And I had first started doing this where I was kind of really gravitating towards, um, writing pieces that were deeply emotional, even if I didn't always understand where it was coming from.
Mm,
It was always a very emotional process for me and a way to um, try to come to terms with my emotions. I think a lot of autistic people don't always understand their emotions so much, maybe in the moment as things are happening. We need a lot of time to process, sometimes days, weeks,
mm,
months, years, just depending on what it is. And, I think once I started and, end of my senior year when in high school, when I auditioned for college, I got a vocal scholarship to attend college and become a vocal performance major. And that was kind of like, it was a really big deal. And so then, now everybody knows that singing wasn't this like secret that I kept to myself
mm,
anymore, that I just kind of did to soothe myself. It was this thing that everybody knew I could do, and it was a big deal. And so I kind of had to fight against my own nature of like being more of an introvert and everything. And
um,
so then it became about performance and all this.
mm,
So while I really enjoyed writing a lot of sad songs, even though I didn't really yet understand the depths of my trauma, I kind of, like I said, I had started to move away from that because I thought, well, if I want a career in music, I need to, do what other people say I should do, and that's the last thing you should ever do. If you want to do any kind of artistic career, it doesn't matter what it is, you make whatever you feel is beautiful to you first and foremost. And then if other people resonate with it, then they are resonating with something that is authentic to you, not something that, is performative. Um, so that was a lesson that took a really long time for me to learn. So I definitely had a weird path where I started out there and then I sort of veered away from
mm,
it. And then after figuring out a lot of things about myself and doing a lot of therapy and everything, I was able to kind of step away and see the bigger picture and then come back to it with this, kind of renewed sense of not only who I was, but the kind of art that I wanted to make, if that makes sense. And so it was definitely kind of a strange path for me, and it was like a very roundabout. I took the long way around for sure. um, but I got there. I got there eventually, and I think that's always the bottom line of what I want to express to other people, and that's something that, like, Rick Rubin says all the time as well. You just make whatever is authentic for you, whatever sounds beautiful to you. You're not Don't try to chase trends. Don't write for the audience that you think you might have, um, or even the audience that you do have. You don't do it for them, because what people are ultimately going to relate to anyway is uh, your own experiences if they have something similar. So I think if you are just kind of really putting yourself out there in a really raw and vulnerable way, I think people gravitate toward that. And I think people need that now more than ever, just considering that, like, the world feels like it's on fire,
mm,
because it quite literally is.
right.
So yeah, I've definitely, even songs that I knew I was never going to release, like I would still write for just myself, even when I was still trying to do this like whole mainstream thing in my early to mid 20s and everything. Um, Even back then, I was like, well, I'm just gonna write this sad song and put it away and put it over here. And I still have a couple of those that have come out recently, and I'm like, this is still a good song.
Mm,
So even though I wrote this 13 years ago,
right.
I'm probably gonna put this, and there's one or two that definitely survived from that time period where I was like, oh wow, even when even when I was trying to stifle my own creativity, some of the stuff was still coming out. And like, there's a song I wrote called Things I Could Never Change. And, it's really just about kind of how I felt growing up and, felt like there's a lot of suffering. And, at the same time, I'm just like, well, I just have to kind of get through this one day at a time and do the best that I can. So there's a lot of hope in that song as well. But when I first wrote it, I really didn't even understand the depth of it at the time.
Mm.
I was just kind of blindly expressing myself. But now when I read the lyrics back to myself, I'm like, wow, some deep down part of me knew a lot of things about myself and my experience that I wasn't able to say out loud yet in my day-to-day life. I wasn't able to really show any of this authentically. So um, it's a really big deal for me now to just kind of really embody that space of empowerment. And this is who I am. And if two people like it, that's fine. It's all good. Because I'm doing it for me now and for the girl that I was, and the young woman that I never got to be, and all of the things I never got the chance to experience because of what I was going through at the time. So
Yeah, that's so fascinating, actually. Just expressing yourself when you're younger without
yeah,
knowing what
yeah.
what that experience actually was. It got me curious, like, 'cause I've never been a very expressive musically person. What
Hmm.
was it like trying to translate? Is it like lyrical, like you know how you feel? Is it
Hmm.
you know the kind of chords or the sounds you want to hear, or is it
Hmm.
also then maybe the music you listen to or cover and stuff? Like I'm curious how that
I I
begun
think
for
it's a
you.
little bit of everything, truth
Okay.
be told. I mean, I definitely think, it's but I will say, even when I was trying to, I went through this period of time in my 20s where I was trying to listen to some more mainstream stuff and just kind of try to understand what it was all about. Like, why am I so weird? Um, and even when I was listening to that stuff, still didn't write that way.
Mm.
Um, I know for me, I get into these almost like, um, there's a weird space in creativity, and I don't know if it's a, like, theta brainwave, that type of a thing or what, but for me, I get into this kind of almost, like, zoned out space. When I really have an idea, I'm usually fiddling with something else, number 1, like, I'll sit down and I'm like, "Okay, I've got a show, I've gotta practice these songs or something," and I'm stressed out, and that's always kinda what happens, or I'm sad, and I'm just sitting around. But either way, I'll be doing something, watching something, doing some maybe I'm in the shower. It really can hit you anywhere, and sometimes it's happened to me when I was driving. I have to, like, pull over and lyrically write stuff down or, like, record something in my phone. I'm so old that, 10, 15 years ago, I had one of those little, like, fancy, like, microphone recorders that you could only record, like, so much space in them, like,
Okay,
before
sure.
phones had the capability of,
Right.
like, recording stuff on
Yeah.
them, and now we have apps for that, obviously. But, like, you can have GarageBand in your iPhone,
Mm.
obviously. Um, so I was constantly doing stuff like that, where it's like doing little snippets and everything. And I'm always like writing down little lyrics and little snippets of things.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times when I sit down and I'm like going to write a song, um, sometimes I'll write a verse or a chorus or something, and I'll put it away and just be like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. And
Mm.
I don't look at it for 10 years. Literally. I just finished a song a couple of weeks ago that I had been sitting on for years, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And then for some reason, a few weeks ago, I knew how to finish it out of nowhere. And then there are other songs like Stockholm or Blood in the Water where I sat down and I wrote those in like 10 minutes because I just get zoned out and I go into this place of like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's weird. Sometimes it's a melody, but sometimes I'll just kind of play something on the piano and then a certain melody comes to me, and then the lyrics will just kind of flow a little bit, and then all of a sudden I realize what I'm writing and what I'm trying to express, and then I'm on a roll, and it just kind of keeps going, and I can't stop once I start. I almost get into a state of, like, hyper focus, you know? You ever get to where you're doing something that you really love, and you're like, "If anybody interrupts me right now, they're not gonna survive it. They're not gonna survive. Like, don't talk to me. Don't call me on the phone. Don't text me. Don't wave at me as you drive by my house. Like, leave me alone. I'm deep in the focus." And you just get into this, like, really, and I think that's also like a neurodivergent trait where you just get really zoned out and hyper focused on something that you are doing. And, you know, and when I get in that state, I really love it because I'm like, well, now I have too many lyrics and I need to, like, and then you kind of, and then there's like the editing process that comes in too, where you're just like, oh, well, I think I could say this a little bit better. And then the next thing you come up with, you're like, holy shit, I really like that. And for me, if I write something and I don't want to kind of listen to it 10 times in a row because I'm just like so excited about it, then I'm like, whatever. you know, I'm not going to show this to anybody. I don't like this. You kind of know when something's at least pretty good. But like I said, I'm my own worst critic, so I show a lot of stuff to my partner Kevin first, and he's usually very supportive and encouraging, and he's like, this is good, and I'm like, I don't know. I needed to hear it from you, I guess. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe this isn't that good. But yeah, I get into this hyper focused state of sort of just like temporary insanity when I'm really excited I'm writing something. Now, sometimes I'm depressed and I want to sit down and write something. And again, I'll have like little spurts, like what I was saying before, where I'll write something and I'll be like, well, this is a good start to something, but I'm stuck and I don't know where to
Mhm.
go. So I kind of just have to set this aside because, and a lot of 9 times out of 10, it's because I'm not really ready to face whatever I'm trying to write about.
Mm.
And sometimes I don't even know. And then months later or even years later, I'll go back to it and be like, oh, that's what this is about. And now I know how to finish it. And I'm in a better mental state because I have come through the other side of being able to deal with whatever it was that I was trying to write about. So now I have a different and more healthy perspective. So I am able to come at it from the perspective of, having survived that and maybe just gotten to a bit of higher ground with it. And, being able to look back on something and write about it from that healthier perspective is usually better for me. I find that if I'm not finishing something in the moment, it's because I'm not ready to face it.
Nice. I like you.
Yeah.
I like that you take it as in kind of whatever that whatever, allow it to
Yeah.
be what it wants to be, kind of thing. That's nice.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Right.
cool.
That's so true. And I'm
Yeah,
trying to do that for myself too,
right.
just kind
Yeah,
of like, man, is it okay if I just exist? Is it okay if we all just exist? It's weird that we have to like pay to live in this society. Like that's so wild to me.
yeah.
I'm like, I just want to frolic in the woods. Like I don't want to do any of this.
And play music.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So funny when people like if I find myself in a conversation with like a neurotypical person and they find out how much I stay home, they're just like, "Don't you get bored?" And I'm like, "I don't understand that question. How could you ever be bored at home? There are so many things to do. My piano is at home, my dogs are at home, all of my books are at home. Like, what do you mean you're bored? I don't understand." Like, there's so much to do. Like, what are you talking about? So, if
That's
I get
awesome.
bored, I just go on a walk or something and listen to music because, like, we all know I can't function unless I'm listening to something. So, yeah,
That's
pretty
awesome.
much.
That's awesome.
Just let
Yeah.
just let things be as they are.
Yeah, I like that. I think I didn't even realize how long it's been for our conversation. It's
Oh,
like
whoops.
almost, no, not whoops. Yeah,
I guess it is good to have like a 90-minute conversation and not even realize how much time has gone by.
it's
That's
crazy.
probably good. It also means I talked a lot, but oh
No,
well.
it was talking a lot means you have a lot of insights and knowledge and wisdom, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
I try. I just, I definitely wouldn't wish those experiences on anyone else,
Yeah.
but it has taught me a lot for sure.
Awesome.
So, and I'm grateful for a lot of those lessons. Wish they had come about in maybe a different way, but it is what it is. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you so
it's
much. I
all
think
led
it's
me here.
yeah. I think it's a good place to
Thank
wrap
you.
up. Yeah, thank you. Do you want to say anything else or touch on anything at all?
I really appreciate you having me on. I'm really
I
glad that you were able to finally get this kickstarted for yourself. It's
yeah.
so awesome, and I'm really happy for you.
Thank you. And I'm so glad
You're welcome.
you're my second guinea pig, and
Ah, that's awesome.
it's going better than I expected. So I'm so glad you guys have such great things to share.
That's awesome. Well, you're a great interviewer. I think you asked some really incredible questions. So that's awesome. I love how we sort of talked about music, but it was just like, everything was really tied together with, the experience of where art really comes from. So I think that's a really great focus for, any type of a show or podcast like this that you're doing. This is awesome.
Awesome.
So thank you for having me.
Thank you for that feedback. It's really good. Okay. And
All
okay,
right. Thank
that's
you
good.
so
Thank you so
much.
thank you.
All
It's
right. Talk to you soon.
you too.
Bye.